want some additional Spark?
This year I'm not presenting anything.
I can use it, yes.
But, every year for FOSDEM I'm doing I'm really have to get out of here. Well, we can have lunch, but we don't have to queue for that long.
Yeah.
I did that once, and then I got my own.
Does it make some? Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, that's true. Do you need it?
Give us a presentation of Spark. That would be nice. During the day already, the data for the ways that permit you to work more formally and talking about the Spark is reasonably large subset of data.
So, my name is Yannick Muen. I'm the Spark product manager at AdaCore. And I'm going to talk about the Spark language. So usually I do technical presentations, I present scientific results we achieve, or tool demos, or tutorials, but not today, because all of this you can find on the Spark website. So that's easy. Today I'm going to use this opportunity to present something that we don't show otherwise, a historical perspective of why we got there. And you can see that on this line, it goes back to 1997, the book, then 2002, 2013, 2015, 2017. So as going from team to team, so evolving the project leader for different for each of these books, I believe. And we end up with a small library of books in Spark, small, maybe a tenth of a shelf, and it's not finished. So maybe one day we have Spark for dummies, or maybe. Something else I want to touch on is that something more recent that we see interesting FOSS projects that use Spark. And so we want to encourage this, of course. So I'll talk about those that are particularly noticeable. So going back to the history of Spark, it started a long time ago, more than 30 years now, 1987, at a company with a great name, Program Validation Limited. So they had this goal of indeed giving warranties on programs that you can run, so that you don't end up with a failure that you haven't foreseen. So this company went through various renamings and acquisitions. It was Praxis during a long time. Now it's Altran. And this long time, they had great projects. So one of the first really big was this C-130J, which is a big military plane. And the mission computer application was done in Spark. They had also security, so that's more on the safety realm. They had a security project like Tokeneer, which was a project done by Altran for the NSA in 2005. And we'll talk about it a bit later because in 2008, this project was open source. Because of this event, so Altran partners with AdaCore, and we convinced them that there was some value in pushing the technology forward in open source. So it's been GPL since then. So the past history I won't cover much today. If you are interested, there's this article by Ron Chapman and Florian Chanda that really covers this period. So a number of things evolved. And in 2008 we started something new. So we started this project Highlights. The small tagline is simplifying the use of formal methods. And what we ended up doing in this project is rebuild the whole thing. So we scrapped the previous technology, kept the good ideas, and we did it. And the result was this Spark 2014 language and toolset. In between, so while we were rebuilding the technology, projects were still being done. So two noticeable projects are the IFACTS project. So IFACTS is part of the air traffic control over the UK. So when you travel to the UK, usually by flight, or when you use the shuttle, you're using this software which helps air traffic controllers to foresee possible collisions, drive the decision making in asking planes to do some actions to avoid collision. In 2013, the Muen separation kernel, the first version was issued, and we'll talk a bit more about this because this one is open source. An interesting fact is that these two were initially coded with the previous version of Spark, obviously, and in the past years they have both migrated to Spark 2014. So you may say, well, migration, isn't it a big word for going from a subset of ADA to a subset of ADA? Because it's precisely not as integral as a subset of ADA. You're going to see that. Please. Yes.
We're so sorry.
No problem. So let's see an example. So this was previous version of Spark. So it's not a subset of it. It was presented in those days as really a different language. So it was heretic to say that it was a subset of ADA. It was using a subset of ADA as the operational code, on which it was imprinting logical annotations, logical language. So there were two languages in one. And so, for example, here you can see an API about computations and price of something with something that looked like the post conditions that Jacob just mentioned, that says that when add returns, and it must return something, this sum which has some properties, same for melt, and then this one returns this exact value, etc. And you can see that already there was some rich expressions, like these quantified expressions that you can see in mathematics to quantify over a collection. You had that in this language. But there was a purely logical language without relationship to what's executing in the machine. So only for consumption by the analysis systems. So we transformed it into that. So maybe at the first look that doesn't look so different from what you had before. Maybe a bit of syntax foreign. In fact, so all these things now are part of the language. So that's executable, that's really code. Code that expresses properties. So we really tie into what was just presented before. These are the post conditions that were mentioned by Jacob before, using richer properties like quantified expressions here. And these are additions that we felt were needed in Spark, and so are not yet in ADA, and we are pushing so that they are included in the new version of ADA. So here, for example, these contract cases, why do we think we need richer contract? Because they allow to specify pre-post by cases, and it's very common to have services, functionalities that behave differently depending on the inputs or sets of inputs that are given. So for example, here, add, it's a saturating addition, so if the result is less than a given threshold, the result will really be the addition. Otherwise, if the expected result would be greater than the threshold, then it saturates. So these contract cases have these semantics that they divide the input, and this can be checked either statically or dynamically. So I'm just showing it here with a really even nicer display of symbols when you have a ligature in your monospace fonts. Some of my colleagues hate it, but I take this occasion to advocate. I find it cool, and it's really nice to display properties that makes it easier to understand, I think. So what we built during this highlight project is this ecosystem of open source tools. So we built our own ecosystem based on building blocks. So AlterGo, CVC4, Z3, Coq, Isabel, all of these are automatic provers here. So take formulas, say true, false, I don't know. Interactive provers here, so they ask you for inputs and help you work out the proof yourself. And all of these have communities. Some of these, COG, for example, has a huge community, dozens and dozens of research institutes. Those that are most interest to us are these, the automated provers. And Y3 is this orchestrator of proving technology. So what we've done in this project is really go from Ada programs to this intermediate Y3 code. So Y3 is our intermediate language, so what we call an intermediate verification language. It's the assembly language for doing this kind of deep analysis of code that will prove deductive verification. From Y3, there's something called the VC generator, so verification condition generator, or I'll use the simple term formula, that from some code that represents the code here is going to generate mathematical formulas for this code. And we have a shared lab which is called Continuous between us and INRIA, which develops this part. So we co-develop Spark and Y3, so that they have a really, really great integration to go further than what we could do. Yeah, so this, all this, in fact, is for the proof analysis that Spark does. There are two analyses, in fact, that we do. There's proof, and there's flow analysis. Flow analysis is something simpler that checks all the flows in the program. And this is done at this level, really, at the level of this net proof tool. So this is detecting the harder, usually more complex task, which is to go through proof. So in 2 slides, I'm going to present now what we do with flow analysis and proof, because as I said, it's not a technical talk, but just so that you have an idea of what it does. So flow analysis does that. Here is the signature of a service in Ada, and now you can add to it with the Ada 2012 syntax some aspects. After with, and this aspect global is an aspect introduced for Spark. So the tools that work with Spark understand it. The GNAT compilers understand it to some degree. And here we are completing the signature of stabilize with the global variables that are accessed by this service. So here it has additional inputs that are not passed by parameter, and it has initial variable routers. It might be more than one variable. It might be a name that references various variables, in fact, which is partially read or written. And once you've done that, specifying effects that you want the function to respect, then the tool can do this flow analysis and check that the program implements this specification. So that's the explicit specification. You might have also implicit specifications, namely in terms of flows that everything that you compute serves a purpose, otherwise you will get a warning. Well, you're not doing much here. Usually that's a mistake, a typo. Or that everything that you read is initialized. This typically is. It checks both explicit and implicit specification. So that's for flow analysis. And the second one is proof. So proof, using the same signature for stabilize. We can now specify functional behavior, what it expects in entries. For example, this precondition that the modes in entry shouldn't be off. And can specify a post condition. So here is the if expressions, the latest addition to Ada 2012. That's in the case of success, then there should be a relationship between the old value of routers and the new value. And of course, the previous contract and this current one would be added together. So here I'm just focusing on one at a time. Once these specifications are added to the code, the proof tool can check that the program implements this specification. So this is for the explicit functional specification, but there are implicit ones, namely that there are no runtime errors in the code. So all error accesses are within bounds, all arithmetic is also within bounds, respects the rank checks of AI, etc. etc. So to talk a bit about how we got to the current solutions, technical solutions, I chose to present to you in terms of objectives that we had for this revamp of the Spark technology. And so we had really high-level goals, not technical ones like let's use this technology, it's better than this. So we had some of these. but the high-level goals were these. First, functional contracts can be executed, tested, debugged, because we want them to be considered as light code. So we don't want to wait for more proof of these to be useful. We want them to be to replace less precise comments and specifications in natural language of code. We want them to be able to replace some of the testing articles that you would have otherwise in the separate artifacts of the code. So yeah, so that was one of the main things, which completely related to the changes that were going on in Ada at the time, which was this addition of contracts of various forms in the Ada language. The Ada subsets supported in Spark should be as large as possible. Indeed. The main reason not to use the technology is because it doesn't apply in your case. So definitely people who do C won't be able to use anything that will do. We like people who use Ada to be able to use this kind of tooling as much as possible. So that was I'll go into more detail, but that was a big change. User needs no annotation to start proving code. So there are various levels at which you can say proving code. I'm using it here in a large sense, so giving guarantees on the code, whether it's by flow analysis or by proof. And in the booklet that you will find here, that was on the far side on the right in my first slide, the booklet that we wrote with Thales, we have defined 5 levels of different analysis of proof achievements that you can reach. And so at the lowest level, you shouldn't have to work too much. You should be able to just have a program that fits into the subject and start applying it. This one is that you might want to go further than that at some point, but you want few annotations to fully prove the code. Well, we'll see what few means. What we want really here is that it's not super hard to get beyond the initial steps. The last one will also need a bit of background. It's manual proof is something really hard that people really usually don't want to do unless you're a proof geek. So we want manual proof to be not required. So looking at these, each one of these in more details, we want contracts to be executed, tested, and debugged. So of course that's using the AdaCore preconditions and postconditions. If you were here in the previous talk, you know all about them. So that's this aspect pre and post. So really, our view now is that contracts are code. You can do as well with contracts as with code in terms of usability, integration in ID, etc. You can do probably as bad as in code, coding functions which do crazy things. Spark helps you here in that respect because it's more restrictive in what it allows. But that needed some additions to Ada, so we were very pushy with the ARG so that they include in Ada 2012 some of the features which we really needed for proof. So quantified expression, so the ability to state properties of a collection. Expression functions, the ability to abstract properties, so that you don't have to inline everything each time or have to go to the body to state something that you would need in the spec. It would be crazy and would be completely contrary to this spirit of separating the spec and the body, in particular when you want to read to specify rich properties, not just bounds or things that you would inline. So for these two, yeah, we I don't know if we bribed, but we pushed enough the ARG, and in particular our colleagues at AdaCore were a member of the ARG, so that these two features were part of the Ada 2012 standard. The fact that the Ada subset is large, there was a departure from the previous technology. Previous technology had this correct by construction motto that if you followed certain steps and restrictions, it was far easier to verify formally your program. This is true. Unfortunately, that's very rare that you can follow all these constraints from the start. You have to be in a rich, nice situation where you start over and do everything as you're told from the start. And you may need then to completely change your ways of doing things, so that's really a big constraint. So we opted for something different. We say it's all these constraints, they're going to be in your coding standard. So there are other tools. We are developing some of them, but there are other tools. We're going to opt for every feature that doesn't make formal verification impossible. So we included almost everything. What we still exclude to this day are pointers and exceptions. All the rest is in. So in particular, all types, discriminant types, types with dynamic bounds, anything you can pick up. Restriction, no restriction on control flow, so you can return from within the loop anywhere. You can have complex hierarchy of packages. That's not our business. So we know how to make sense of the code. This is a separate issue. Recursion, again, in many embedded situations, you don't need recursion. In some non-embedded or others, you might, and that's okay because we can make sense of it. Generics. There was an attempt at supporting generics in the previous version of Ada, which was quite limited because the attempt was to check generics once and for all. We wanted to allow any generics that the Ada language would allow, so we opted for something much simpler, which is to analyze each instance of the generic. So, we support generics, but in a way that may be less principled than before, but much more permissive and allows more code to be analyzed. So for all these features, all types, no restriction on control for recursion in particular, these in fact there are good reasons why they were not supported before. There are good reasons why they were not supported before. They can be quite difficult to treat in proof, and when we implemented these, we ended up with subtle bugs along the years in the treatment of types with dynamic bounds, in particular complex control flow, recursion, really subtle bugs in how we generate the formulas and which ended up in possible unsoundness in the tool. So we believe today that we have had good fixes for these bugs, but that's one of the reasons why, ideally you want the program to be as simple as possible. We made this choice to allow as much as we could do and to focus on soundness. So of course, each one of these few bugs that I mentioned were treated very, very carefully to be sure that today we don't have them or anything that's still, the initial version of Spark 2014 did not support a number of things. So we felt we had done a big jump here. Some people were saying, well, you don't support OO, you don't support concurrency, tasks, config object, you don't support data environments that were just had been added to Ada 2012. So the sad thing as well is that while we were doing a big jump over this, we were going a bit backward on OO and concurrency because the previous version of Spark was supporting slightly OO, so no dispatching calls, but types, so not really OO, but a bit of types. I was supporting some concurrency, so it was called the Raven Spark, so restrictions over Raven Scar profile pointer. But we opted for, let's get the tool set out and we'll have a roadmap to add these as time goes by. Something else is that Spark code from the start, after a few experiments where we were looking at a solution to mix Ada and Spark code, we opted for something quite fine-grained and at the same time prescribed by the user. So the user can say exactly in their code where the Spark code lives, so that the tool can analyze just this code and not the other. So that's quite possible to mix things that are supported with pointers exceptions on the other side. So the Ada subset is still expanding. So we have added along the years OO programming, including dispatching calls. And for this, we use the best that academia has shown is possible to do, which is to show that derived classes are providing subset of behaviors of the parent classes. So that's called, the long name is Liskov substitution principle. For example, that's one of the means to comply with OO in avionics context now. So the DO 178, avionics standard allows for that, and there's a special supplement to allow for OO that mentions that this curve substituting principle should be verified. By testing, by proof, it should be verified. So essentially, that's a proof thing. It has impact on correlation proof. But on the proof thing, it means that when you derive a function, a subprogram, your precondition will be possibly weaker, so you will accept to be called in more context than the thing you derive from. But your postcondition will be only stronger, so you will deliver more possibly to the caller, because you might be called through a dispatching call with a static type that is one of your parameters. So that makes the kind of analysis that we're doing here, function by function, possible. We added support for concurrency 1 year later. So again, using what had been done in previous technology, so we support Raven's car, really, almost all of Raven's car. Even the extended Raven's car profile that has been defined 1 or 2 years ago. And contrary to the previous technology, we insisted on not having a host of annotations that you need to put in the code. So it's mostly generative, all the things that are accessed by whom, by where, by which tasks, how to detect data races. Much less annotation, much less user work. But it means also it's less modular. So it really builds on the full program to really detect all possible data races. Support for type predicates, type invariants. So I won't go into much detail, but there are 2 types of data invariants in Ada, and we now support both. For why we had to do it one by one, because in fact Ada is defining what this means to be a type predicate or type invariant dynamically, which means that it checks at some points in the execution that some properties are verified. This is not enough for proof. Type predicates, these are the things that should always hold, so what they call strong invariants in academia. And type invariants, they are the things that should hold outside of the defining package. What they are called weak invariants. It means that they are less good than the strong invariants. It just means that sometimes you are allowed to break them when you define operations over your object. And to be able to prove them, you have to be much stricter in what you allow. So you want to allow these to mention any global variable that anyone can modify. You have to be able to assume them, for example, when you enter a package that is responsible for an object, and how to enforce that really these guarantees are strong. Always hold when they should hold. And so that we had to define stronger rules in Spark reference manuals that we could implement, improve, and so. And finally, an exciting one on which we are working now is the support for ownership access types in Ada and Spark. So Ada has a really rich access types of pointers which prevent a number of problems. One which is not prevented, and it's explicit when you do unchecked deallocation. The unchecked thing that can worry you is automatic safe deallocation management of memory. And it's something that other languages like Rust have solved for a number of programs by using this notion of ownership, where a pointer really holds, really owns everything that the tree of memory that is underneath, with mechanisms to borrow this ownership when you're doing a temporary modification to a call, for example. And so we have experimented with that last year in the context of GNATs. We even have a prototype. Last week we sent submissions to the CAV scientific conference for the underlying scientific mechanisms, and to Ada Europe for the proposal for the future Ada standard. You can also read the Ada issue 2040 if you want to be a bit language lawyery. So that's the thing that's cooking for, I would say, the next 2 years, because let's not be too ambitious. The rules will take time to really be defined for Ada and in Spark in combination. So that's a great example where Ada and Spark are moving in the same directions, although we will certainly have a slightly different answer for Spark, which probably is stricter than Okay, so users are lazy. I mean, we are users. We want to have all results without them doing any work. And in particular, when we start, when we want to try out, we'd rather just see what good is it for us before we invest any more work. That's why it was important that you can start doing this analysis, this proof, without further ado. So every subprogram signature, in fact, it has a precondition and a postcondition, which is implicit in its signature. That all inputs of subprogram are in their types, and when you return, all outputs are in their types. There are some consequences in terms of what you initialize, of course. So Spark is a bit stricter than Ada in that respect, that when you're passing things around, they have to be fully initialized in their types. But that gives a really reasonable default functional contract. Then you need to know what are, inputs and outputs. What are these? They are parameters, so that's easy, they are in the signature, and global variables. Might be really global in terms of having the lifetime of the program, or syntactically scoped at an outer scope. And so these, what we call these global variables, that are read and written by any given subprogram directly, indirectly through calls, they are generated by the tool. So here again, this analysis necessarily is not modular. It goes through the call graph and collects all effects so that you don't have to do this work yourself. Now, when you want to go beyond, so you're satisfied with the tool, you want to achieve more, you have to start doing some work, unfortunately. But what we claim now is that you need few or fewer annotations, because few is quite relative to where you start from. Few for many would mean no annotation. That's not possible. And again, it depends where you put the goal. So if you aim for something easy, you will need less work. If you aim for something harder, more guaranteed, you will need to work more. So yeah, proof, as I said, is mostly modular. So we will analyze using the very complex tools, very rich SMT solvers, subprogram by subprogram, which means that to analyze calls, we will need whatever information you give us, preconditions, postconditions in particular. In some cases, we can do without because we have inlining mechanisms. So internal subprograms that have no contracts, the tool inlines them. Some loops, so what we call the simple for loops, we just enroll them, so that you don't have to add the necessary annotations in simple cases. And things that do not participate in the API, because the API is really the specification, but things internal we'd like to strip all of them if possible, and try to go in this direction. You can factorize annotations. For example, data invariants. That was really important to add support for these predicate type invariants, because not putting them means that you should specify them for every pre-post everywhere where you manipulate some of these data. So that's really important factorization here. And now a lot also of these benefits has to do with how we now generate formulas. So I'm going to that, but that's the technology behind it, the fact that we completely replaced the technology using state-of-the-art. And now this generation of formulas, you need much fewer loop invariants, special kind of annotations needed for loops sometimes. You don't need cut points, so ways to simplify the proof work. So just to show it in practice, an example where you really need fewer annotations. Spark Skin, that was a container for Stratox, and there was a standard C implementation of that algorithm. And Rod Chapman, who was at the time leader of the Spark team at Altran, wrote the Spark implementation of that. So the Spark implementation, so there's a scientific article about it, and the Spark implementation required a lot of work. So you had many annotations for effects and dependencies. So the global I mentioned and depends on the one for dependencies between inputs and outputs. There were many preconditions and postconditions. So I don't count here just a precondition, because a precondition could be tens of lines of code. So I count conditions, the things that you AND together, because there are new conditions that you want to check. There were a lot of conditions in loop ignorance as well, around loops. There were a number of annotations to just do with the limitations of the tool in terms of scalability. And even with that, you had to complete a number of proof manuals. Okay. So there was a huge effort for someone really worldwide expert in the technology who has led the development, or some effort at least, to prove absence of runtime errors on this code. That's the situation today. So today with the current technology, it's really achievable by anyone. And that's related to what I mentioned before. So to end up with this part, manual proof. So you don't want to read that, that's why it's so small. On the left, you have a formula that was generated by the previous tool that it couldn't prove, and so there's an encoding of your trace in your program, of a static path in your code. And these H1, H2 correspond to assignments, calls, various things that occur on this path, with an encoding of all the ADA types. And you want to prove this conclusion that might correspond to a postcondition or runtime error. Well, when the automatic provers of the time didn't do, you had to go through manual proof possibly. So this is a manual script where you have a number of instructions: do this, infer that by this rule, unwrap this, instantiate that, etc. Manipulating this formula. So this we won't do, at least not in this shape, because these formulas are really far from the code. This is different language, this is yet another language. Obviously that's a lot of languages, so required too much effort for the typical projects, even those having a really critical and secure application. And so what we do now is that we target automatic provers. So we have support with the state-of-the-art SMT solvers, AlterGo, CBC, FOSDEM, and the whole platform really targets all of these with adaptations to the formulas. And these really handle well arithmetic and quantified properties that arise from new code, just the natural encoding. The encoding that we do, apart from this specialization, the natural encoding that we do is also tailoring these SMT solvers, so we really focus on automatic proof and not so much manual proof like before. And the user has some control over the strategy of proof and timeouts, so I won't go into that, but that's at the tool level when you use the program. Okay, so I have roughly 10 minutes to go over FOSS projects. Good thing is that there aren't that many. So Joachim Strandberg was here before. So if you have questions at the end, that's for him. And he has this quite rich library of things that are useful in critical applications. That is mostly coded in Spark, valid strings, various containers, UTF-8 parsers that were just added yesterday, at least officially, and a few wrappers on AdaCore, but wrappers so that they can be called from Spark code. That's a really typical also thing that we do, implementing maybe in Ada, but make them available from Spark. Certyflie is software for this drone, for this small Crazyflie drone that you can buy, open source platform. And Certyflie is the software that runs on top of it to do the stabilization. It was coded by my colleague Anthony Lemoratio. And he replaced FreeRTOS on this by Ravenscar, profile of Ada in the meantime, and the stabilization communication code by Spark, and did absence of runtime error proof. So there's a cool demo feature where you can let it fall and it lands slowly. At least we can do it in the small rooms like that. And it's used in prototyping, teaching, research. So we have a company Sogilis, of whom we have representatives here, who are using Crazyflie for prototyping, and Jérôme Hugues, researcher from ISAE, who uses it in teaching research. PolyObI, talking about Jérôme Hugues, it's him, is developing this high integrity middleware for ADL. So ADL is an architectural description language. There's a tool to generate Ada code called Ocarina, but of course, all these things that are generated, they need to talk through this middleware. And so this middleware was previously in Ada, and now it's been moved to Spark. And it tells a bit of this story in the paper that you will find here that you presented last year at the Pharmacy and Front. And the cool thing, so it did proof of absence of runtime proof of some functional contracts over this middleware. And the even cooler thing is that his colleague, he had a colleague, yes, still a colleague, Christophe Viarion, and they went through this process of developing these two, or adapting these two middleware from Ada and C to use on one side Spark and on the other side from a C, so equivalent tooling for C, to prove absence of runtime errors and possibly more. The cool thing is that he did it much faster, and his colleague at some point had to stop because it was too hard. Not to say that it's impossible, but Ada and Spark made it much easier to achieve. Pulsar, so still from Sogilis, still the same people here. It's drone autopilot, so there's not yet a public code repository, but there will be by the end of the year. It's still ongoing, so right now what they achieve is, in the autopilot, is manual and stabilized flights, and soon they will have low-test flight and then really full autopilot. And it's part of a project to achieve really high level of safety for the drone industry, so the highest level, level A, of the avionics standard, D178. So Spark is one part of the process that we put together around agile methods and foundry methods to achieve that at a reasonable cost. And so Spark is used for pulling some of the functionalities and also absence of containers. Stratox glider by Martin Baker, researcher from Technical University at München. It's a framework to control this unmanned fixed-wing glider model to collect weather data. So it's launched from a balloon and it glides, but how do you guide it? Well, you need a kind of autopilot. And they did that over a very small period of time, a few months. They achieved proof of absence, they target proof of absence of runtime error and functional contracts. And so you can also see the results in the slides at this location. And what I show here is that these are all the units of code in the software for the glider. All the green here has been proof for absence of runtime errors and some functional properties. The gray ones are the specs are in Spark, and the black ones are not in Spark. And so yeah, it's ongoing projects, but they already achieved a lot in a very short time. Token here, I mentioned it at the beginning, so that was led by Janet Barnes at Altran, this project. A few months, maybe 1 year, project for the NSA to demonstrate that it was possible to develop very high security software. So EAL5 is the level in the common PTR, very, very difficult to get, with formal methods at a reasonable cost. And so the cool thing is that all the project artifact statistics on the original code are available from this webpage. And you have a version that we have completed the translation to Spark 2014 not long ago, which is part of the test suite of Spark Pro, or Spark Discovery, and which is part of the examples that we distribute with the release. Now Muen. Muen is the largest Spark open source project. It's this separation kernel by Adrian Rexeger and Reto Bürki. So these two are researchers at University of Rapperswil, and they work with Secunet, which is a security company in Germany. So you look at the website really to know all the details of the multiple features that have been added since 2013. It runs on x86-64, and the goal was to have this very, very small code base of 3,000 lines of code in Spark, 300 lines of code in assembly, generally, so it's only grown a bit since then, but it's very, very secure software on which they prove absence of runtime errors. The cool thing is that the latest version, their website, on which they put it on Mirage.js on top of it. So it's really functional, and I mean, on their laptop they use Muen. It's really a functional separation kernel. And to what they say, which is true, is that Muen is really a milestone in getting this first open source separation kernel that is proved for absence of runtimers. And small one, it's one that can be modified by others because of its small size and its simplicity. So if you're interested in security, look at this one. As I said before, the code was originally in the previous Spark, and they managed to migrate it to Spark 2014. And so now it's moving on with the newest technology. Something interesting is that security is a never-ended battle. You have to defend against the vulnerabilities of tomorrow, and how best to illustrate the strength that they had with their approach, then to see how well they did with Meltdown and Spectre, which were completely unexpected by the worldwide community. And if you look at these mails that were sent on the Muen dev mailing list, so you learn that Meltdown is prevented not necessarily by Spark, but by the way that they selected very, very small set of optimizations options to do this virtualization. And Spectre is really mitigated, and although it could be vulnerable, it's much less than if they had multiple possible other jumps that they would not have defended against. So it's both security is not a software thing. So security is a system thing, and in software it's not the issue of choosing that or that language, but certainly the choice of simplicity and going for strong warranties like they did accounts for a lot of the results that they get here. So very fast Spark community resources. So there's a community release every year. Next year it will be bundled with NAT, so we have only one on the load. And if you want to get the most from Spark, there's a small difference between Spark Discovery and Spark Pro, the number of provers that are shipped. So we only ship one with right now with what we call Spark Discovery. So Spark Discovery is both our Pro and community version for everyone. Spark Pro is the one for people who pay us. But on the community version, in fact, you can install CPC4 and D3 easily. It's documented, so please look at this to get the most of proof. And particularly some of the features like context example will only be available if you do that. Now, if you want to learn Spark now, there's plenty of online resources. AdaCore University, the 5-module class. There's another 5-module class which is not yet on the website, which is you can access it from GitHub. And all of these will move to a new Ada and Spark learning website from AdaCore this year. There's a blog, we'll move to AdaCore blog this year, and there's plenty of resources that I don't have time to cover, but you will find them from the Spark website. The great thing is that some people in the community are also producing learning materials, so for example, Jérôme Hug and Christophe Garion, they're producing this Spark by example for teaching. Martin Baker produced a really nice tutorial introducing to Spark. So if you produce anything like that, let us know. We're very happy to advocate it. There are community events where we try to gather both open source and other communities, also professional communities around Spark. So and researchers. Spark and Pharmacy Days. Well, it's Pharmacy and Spark Days, but I think I was biased here. Which occurred for the first time in 2017, will occur again this year at the National Institute of Science and Technologies in the US on June 27, 28. So we have a great program, great speakers. If by any chance you happen to be there, drop. We have presentations, upcoming presentations at conferences. So Alexandre Seignier, who happened to have presented his work at the Embedded Mobile and Automotive just before me. So if you want to have a look at what he's doing for security, you can probably watch the video later. We'll present at Bob Conference in Berlin, and they will do presentations at Ada Europe, obviously. Finally, if you want to play with Spark and you're too lazy to download the tool, you can play with it at this address right now. That will be also part of the Spark website. There are a few examples, click around, so proof by clicking. Yeah. So what's your first project with Spark? That's my question to you. Maybe you have time for 1 or 2 questions.
Questions?
Okay. Thanks.
Is there a platform difference between the core and both?
No, so the question is there not impact at runtime between ADA and 4 in terms of